You probably had no idea that as recently as 2022, Russian government officials suggested dropping nuclear weapons on the state of Nevada, or that even to this date, there are signs on buildings in downtown Las Vegas marking the buildings as official nuclear bomb shelters. As this video will reveal, all of this and more is really true. More on all that later, but today, the threat of nuclear war is more real than it's been since the so-called end of the Cold War in December 1991, due to a bunch of reasons better suited for other people to explain. Now, because modern political affairs are, well, messy, I'm going to spare you all of that discussion. And today we're going to turn our attention to the past. Yeah, this is a story. It's the crazy story of a letter signed off by the one and only Albert Einstein. This letter that led to the insanity known as the Nevada nuclear test site, story of a government lying to its people for well over 50 years, nuclear bomb parties on the Las Vegas Strip, and the devastating toll that this took on innocent human life right here in America. I'm Steven, I'm not leaving Las Vegas, and this is the untold tale of what happened when the atom was king, the future of humanity balanced on the head of a pin, and Las Vegas was directly in its crosshairs.
You are the target of those who would trample the liberties of free men.
They always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb. Duck and cover.
I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think Nevada could or would be the target for a nuclear strike in modern times. The fact is that I'm starting this video this way, it's not without merit. Stick around because there have been threats as even recently as early in 2022. Las Vegas itself is a major population center. It's near Hoover Dam, and as we covered on this channel before, that itself is a major source of water and hydroelectricity to much of the entire southwestern United States. Add in military bases like Groom Lake, also known as Area 51, Nellis Air Force Base, and a strike here would make total sense. But it's one location that was threatened just this year by a Russian official, that of the Nevada test site, which is where our story actually begins. Now, this video deals with some pretty serious topics, and so before we start, I want to ask you a serious question while we introduce our channel sponsor, because, well, in order to make these types of high-effort videos, we need to pay our bills somehow, right? But did anybody notice how during the COVID shutdown and the years that have followed, how big businesses like Walmart, Amazon, and Costco have gotten huge, while so many of us other people have struggled? I know at least two people here in town that completely lost their businesses, and it's absolutely tragic, to be honest. Well, luckily, I've teamed up with the very last American-made, family-owned manufacturer of the stuff that you use every day. The kind of stuff you'd find under the kitchen sink or somewhere in your bathroom. You know, the boring kind of stuff. The best part is, it's better quality products, and it doesn't cost any more than what you'd usually buy. So, if you want to support small manufacturing and take a bite out of the corporate monopolies one order at a time, head on over to switchaway.com/NLLV and drop your info so you can learn some more. We'll reach out to you directly so we can get your family switched away to better quality products that promote smaller family-owned businesses. So hit the link below and I'll get back to you soon. And don't be fooled, it really can change the history of big business as we know it if we were all to band together and switch away one person at a time. Now, speaking of history, back to the video. Nevada has a bizarre history. Since its first day as a state on October 31st, 1864, it was a place for the US government to do pretty much anything they wanted to. And more often than not, that would focus on secretly, and sometimes not so secretly, building up the US military while the rest of us tried our hand at the blackjack tables. And that probably started as far back as 1917, when the Kingsland Munitions Factory in Lyndhurst, New Jersey started on fire. Munitions are a fancy way of saying ammo, and since fire, gunpowder, and dynamite don't mix, in just over 4 hours of the fire, over 500,000 pieces of ammunition had been detonated. Now, miraculously, that day no one died, and it's been said by some that this caused the US government to look for a safer place to store and test out explosives. Nevada looked like a perfect spot, and it happened to have a few things going for it. At the time, it was much more of a barren land devoid of people than it is today. There were only 80,000 people in the entire state back then. It also just so happened that prior to being granted statehood, the federal government had already swooped in and snapped up most of the land in the region that the state would eventually occupy. A strange law, probably intentionally written into the state constitution, made sure that none of that land, already claimed by the government, would be taken away. It would remain in government control, and never to be sold. And just like that, on Halloween Day 1864, the United States federal government became the largest landowner in the brand new state of Nevada. So what better place for a slow but steady military buildup than hiding in plain sight in the middle of the Nevada desert? But you likely wouldn't recognize the United States' position on war and weapons after World War I ended in 1918, and American corporations took up the task of manufacturing goods for the European nations that were ripped apart by that conflict. Then in 1939, a bizarre twist of events saw the world's most famous physicist signing a letter his friend had wrote. He put it in an envelope and sent it off to the President of the United States. This letter was signed off by the one and only Albert Einstein. It was sent to then President Roosevelt, and as famous economist Milton Friedman was known as saying, "There's nothing that does so much harm as good intentions." So while the letter was written as a warning against the creation of a weapon using uranium that could literally end the world if developed, Roosevelt instead sent Einstein a reply, and this reply stated, quote, "I found this data of such import that I have convened a board consisting of the head of the Bureau of Standards and a chosen representative of the Army and Navy to thoroughly investigate the possibilities of your suggestion regarding the element of uranium." And just like that, the nuclear dragon had been awakened. And for over the next 50 years, it would breathe its radioactive breath all over the Nevada desert and all over the hundreds of thousands of poor victims unfortunate enough to simply live in the wrong place. These people would become known as the Downwinders, and as we'll explain a little bit later, they became the most affected of all. Within 11 years of sending this letter, Nevada would take center stage for what would become the only real existential threat humanity has ever created for itself. And it all started, like most things in Nevada, on taking a huge risk and hoping those involved had properly hedged their bets. In 1946, the US government established the Atomic Energy Commission. Of course, they told everyone that they were forming the commission to, quote, "monitor the peacetime development of atomic science and technology," end quote. But within a few years, the real purpose of the AEC would begin to unravel itself in a twisted series of events. Flash forward to 1950, when then US President Harry Truman signed an act designating 680 square miles of the US government-owned land in Nevada, just 65 miles north of Las Vegas itself, to be known as the Nevada Test Site. Now, this land was formerly known as the Las Vegas Bombing and Gunnery Range, but little did any of the soldiers in the area know at the time that within just a short period, they would see explosions in the desert that their imaginations would never be able to conceive on their own. The first blast lit up the Nevada sky on January 27, 1951, and it was called Shot Able. Shot Able was a 1 kiloton bomb, and its blast was so large that it's said to have been visible as far away as San Francisco, California. That's over 450 miles away. Seismic shockwaves were felt in Las Vegas, and for the first time in history, humans had successfully figured out a way to end all life on Earth as they knew it. Now, if you're wondering, a 1 kiloton bomb is the equivalent of 1,000 tons of dynamite in the middle of the Nevada desert. Yeah, 2 million pounds of dynamite. This test was large enough to level a large building, an entire city block, and at the time it was considered absolutely terrifying. It was the start of many tests, however. Over the years, over 1,021 different nuclear tests were conducted at the site. What happened in the years that followed was both tragic and somewhat entirely predictable. Before we get there, we should really discuss the famous viewing parties in Las Vegas and the strange way that people were fooled into supporting these tests and trusting that nothing could possibly go wrong. In 1952, journalists were invited up to the Yucca Mountain area for the first time to witness these blasts in person. This was part of a propaganda campaign led by the US government, somewhat to flex their muscles and show the world who the real superpower was. Understandably, some residents in Vegas were a little concerned. This whole nuclear radiation thing, well, it must have some risks, they thought. But you know it has 0 risks? Subscribing to this channel where you'll get more documentary films just like this, so click subscribe right now. But those concerns were drowned out by a US government campaign touting minimal dangers, increased publicity and business for the city. Amazingly, people actually bought this, and before you knew it, Vegas was rebranded as the, quote, Atomic City, with visitors flooding into town and watching the mushroom clouds from the Strip, downtown, and even their hotel rooms. People close to the blasts were told they were going to be totally fine. They were given testing equipment like badges to wear and told they would be part of a study on nuclear fallout, and tests would just continue. How many tests? A lot of tests. 235 above ground detonations. That's 1 bomb every 3 weeks for 12 years. Of course, increased tourism, military investment, jobs, construction, and $176 million of government money to the region, 2/3 of that going directly to the city of Las Vegas. A nation was suddenly enchanted with nuclear energy. They were totally oblivious to the toll that was being exerted on the people downwind from the blast. And for decades to come, these tests would be the catalyst for what some claim to be as many as 690,000 1,000 deaths due to cancer and other nuclear radiation-related illnesses. And the term downwinder isn't one that most know anyways. So just like it sounds, downwinders are people unfortunate enough to live downwind from areas where nuclear tests are conducted. And by the time the big tests had finished in 1957, the years of testing began to take its toll on people living in Nevada, Arizona, and neighboring Utah. So it just so happens that when a nuclear weapon detonates, gas form of something called iodine-131 is produced. Now, in large quantities, this can actually burn the skin off of your body, but it can also be carried through the air, and when it's inhaled or ingested, it affects the thyroid gland, which uses iodine from food we eat to produce thyroid hormones. It simply absorbs the iodine-131 with its radiation, pumping those particles directly into the person breathing it in. So then what happens if we set nuclear bombs off in the desert for over a decade? What if that iodine-131 were to get into the atmosphere and be spread over places people were living at a rate of one massive explosion every 3 weeks? Well, they've conducted studies about this actually in the 1980s, and the results, while tragic, shouldn't be all that surprising. For example, residents in Cedar City, Utah saw a noticeable rise in cancer rates for nearly 30 years following the 1960s, after nuclear testing finally stopped. And as those affected started to take their case up with the federal government, they were shot down and blocked, with so-called experts downplaying the events and claiming nothing was actually out of the ordinary. But there really was no denying it by then. Radiation was going everywhere, and eventually there was actual proof. As early as 1953, a test called the Harry shot earned the nickname Dirty Harry. This was after the unexpected winds carrying so much radiation into the small town of Cedar City that it maxed out Geiger counters in the area. When residents began to call in and panic to the Atomic Energy Commission, the government launched what else? An emergency film made to convince people that there was little to no risk from this sudden spike in radiation. In all, it's estimated that anywhere between 330,000 to 690,000 deaths were caused either directly or indirectly by exposure to the tests in the Nevada desert. A commission formed in the 1980s to investigate was unable to draw any real conclusions. From leukemia rates being 5 times higher than normal in downward Mormon communities, to spikes in thyroid cancer in children, a relatively rare form of cancer in kids, the evidence was irrefutable, but little was done. In the 1970s, then Senator Ted Kennedy drafted a bill called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. Unfortunately, this never received a single vote in the Senate, and it wasn't until 1990 that then President George H.W. Bush signed the act into law, which promised that, with proof of being affected, a minimum of $50,000 and a maximum of $100,000 would be paid out to people living in the 22 affected Nevada and Utah counties. So what diseases did one need to have in order to qualify? The list of covered ailments ranged, but included leukemia, thyroid cancer, bone cancer, and any number of other cancers directly related to exposure to low-level radiation. This was, in a way, of course, the government admitting that they had done wrong, without actually ever really admitting anything. It took nearly 40 years for the U.S. government to officially recognize, through the form of direct payments to its own citizens, that the Nevada tests were devastating. And as of 2018, there had been 34,372 claims approved by the government, totaling over $2 billion in payments. The National Cancer Institute estimates the tests subjected people in the USA to a dose of iodine-131 approximately 500 times larger than that was released in Chernobyl many years later. And although read in the Senate during the Clinton administration, talked about during George Bush Jr.'s presidency, and even after promises made by Barack Obama, the USA has yet to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, an international document that would see 44 nuclear-capable nations agreeing to put a stop to all testing of all nuclear arms. The United States is not alone in not signing the document. India, Iran, Pakistan, and Israel have all refused, as of November 2022, to sign the same document. Fast forward to today, the Nevada test site remains one of the most radioactive spots on the planet Earth, and with no plans to clean it up anytime soon, and arguments still being had over whether or not Yucca Mountain should still be used for radioactive waste storage, things aren't going to be changing anytime soon. And even now, as Forrest Gump might put it, crazy is as crazy does. With Evgeny Alexeyevich Fedorov, a member of the Russian parliament, known as the State Duma, stating in March of 2022 that instead of attacking the Ukraine, Russia really should train its sights on the Nevada test range, where he claims the US government would have no way to strike back, warning that the missile that they would send would, quote, be a nuclear explosion. Now, as shocking as this might sound, the fact that he followed this up with insane claims about hitting labs where America is secretly developing the next COVID virus likely guarantees that he's just a crackpot, and hopefully other Russian government officials are dismissing him immediately. One thing is for certain, though, And that's that in the modern day of personal drones, always on live streaming, and revelations of both science and common sense in our society as it stands, we can expect that if the US government ever does go back to nuclear testing, these tests will be conducted 100% of the time in the middle of the ocean, not split between the wastelands of the Mojave and the Marshall Islands. And that in and of itself is one positive way to end the video, right? So once again, my name is Steven, I'm not leaving Las Vegas, and I thank you for watching. And look, if you like this content, you really should subscribe. I'll be bringing you more documentaries like this, and already have a few on the channel for you, with some on the screen that you can click on right now. Once again, I thank you for watching. Love goes out to my wife, Sweet Caroline, and we say 3, 2, 1, and click.